What up? It's Dregs1 back for another installment of the history of the Bay. And today I'm going to go into a very special topic. I've covered this extensively on TikTok on my series, but I want to give a fully detailed background of what I understand on the history of Mac Dre, one of the most popular figures in Bay Area rap history, someone who was very influential to myself as well as my whole generation. And it's a crazy story. It's an incredible story full of highs and lows. And there's a lot of details that I feel get misrepresented. And of course, I wasn't around personally for some of the stuff that I'm going to speak on, but I've done my homework. I've been around other people who are close to this situation, and I'm going to give my best for the listeners to really pay some tribute to the great Mac Dre. So as we know, Mac Dre was born in Oakland in 1970, and he moved to Vallejo. He actually did not live in the Crest Side neighborhood, but that's where his friends were, and that's where he hung out and spent most of his time. And you know how that goes. When you're around people from a certain area and you're always there, you pretty much are from the neighborhood. And Vallejo is a really interesting city because it's small. It's only about 120,000 people. The neighborhoods are very close knit, including with each other. People tend to all know each other on a small town kind of tip. Dre went to Hogan High School. From what everybody says, he was very popular there. And the Vallejo rap scene is also very prolific. Of course, you have Mac Dre and a lot of other rappers from the Crest Side, Mac Mall, etc. You also have Young Lay from North Vallejo. You have E40 and the Click, of course, from the Hillside neighborhood. Lil Bruce, Celly Cell, In Too Deep, many others. Even current times with cats like SOB, RBE, and Lil Russell holding it down out of Vallejo. It should be stated that it is well known that at one point in time, the South and the North had a little beef, Crest Side and Hillside neighborhoods. This has been well documented, so I don't feel like I'm out of place by speaking on it. And as Mac Dre is coming up in these times, of course, he's somewhat involved in terms of just having his affiliation with people in the neighborhood. It's very well known that Mac Dre's crew, the Romper Room, got their name by being young, mischievous kids, playing pranks, just hanging out, doing small petty crimes, etc. out in the neighborhood, causing ruckus, to where an older cat in the neighborhood said, man, y'all just like the Romper Room, which is a popular kids TV show. And they kind of took that and ran with it. Very closely knit group, very well respected in the streets and in the music world. And it's not long before Mac Dre gets into rapping, recording demo tapes, performing at talent shows, starting to get his reputation up. When Mac Dre first started rapping, he came out under the name MC Dre, but he said that was a little too much New York style, so he switched it up to Mac Dre. At the same time, E40 and his brothers and sisters and his cousin, Be Legit, D-Shot, Sugar T, they formed the Click, and their reputation is starting to get around. And almost by default, they're kind of like the representatives of each of their neighborhoods. And I want to speak on this very carefully because I think in recent years, because of stuff that's been on the internet, this has been blown out of proportion. The idea of beef between E40 and Mac Dre. Now, what is documented, what I do feel comfortable speaking on is you will hear some rap disses. Some demo tapes have been released. You can look up the Mac Dre and Lil Bruce SIG tapes. SIGing is of Vallejo slang for just kind of capping on somebody. And as like I said, the rappers from the South Side, Hillside area, Millersville, includes Lil Bruce himself. And you have Celly Cell and the Click. On the north side of Vallejo, you have Mac Dre and the Mac, who we'll get into later, Coolio, the Underdog, and some of the other guys that are affiliated with the Romp. So you can hear these demo tapes that went out where Mac Dre was taking shots at Celly Cell. You can hear Mac Dre and the Mac taking shots at Lil Bruce. Lil Bruce's song, Fuck Lil Bruce, actually samples Mac Dre's voice saying that on one of his demo tapes. And you can hear on certain Mac Dre records where he's taking shots at the Click. You can listen to the song On My Toes where he says, I'm down with the sick shit, I'm not with the click shit. And at the same time, you can hear on E40's early records where he says, California living can't fuck with me. And there's another E40 song out there where he calls Mac Dre Andrea. But these are just little rap battles. As far as I know, and from what I've heard, it didn't escalate into anything serious between Mac Dre and E40. Obviously, a lot of time has passed, and that beef between those neighborhoods has squashed. But at the time that this was going on, it's only natural that the different rappers from each side would be somewhat caught up in the middle of that. So as I mentioned, Mac Dre was closely affiliated with the Mac. Now, from what I understand about the Mac, Michael Robinson, this guy was ahead of his time. He was one of the first cats from Vallejo to really be putting it down. And he had records under Strictly Business Records, The Game is Thick, and some other joints that had dropped. From what I understand, the Mac was really well liked and really well respected. He has his own separate fans that still remember him to this day. And he was down with Kyrie, who was the producer. And once the Mac and Mac Dre linked up, the Mac brought Mac Dre to Kyrie, and that really got him started. Tragically, around this time, the Mac was killed. I believe it was a case of mistaken identity. Very tragic situation. This had a profound impact on Mac Dre. He's spoken on this throughout the years of how the Mac was a really big influence in his style. It's very possible that if the Mac had lived, he might have even become bigger than Mac Dre. Who knows? But they're all part of this Mac family tree, this Mac bloodline. And Mac Dre really started hitting his stride when he dropped Too Hard for the Fucking Radio, which was a big hit. He was only 18 at the time, as he says in the song. And this one really put him on the map and started getting exposure around Vallejo, around the whole Bay, around the whole country. The EP Young Black Brother was released in 1989, followed by the song California Living, which also featured Coolio the Underdog. So I think it's important that people understand just how popular Mac Dre was becoming at this time. He was really hitting his stride. His songs, his EPs, his singles were really starting to pick up steam. He was doing a lot of shows around California. Cats like Ice Cube and Tupac were rocking shows with him, and he was really starting to make a name for himself as one of the up-and-comers from the Bay Area. It's just kind of unfortunate that as Mac Dre's career is taking off, things in the streets are getting pretty hot with his crew. And like I said earlier, the Romper Room, close-knit bunch of guys. Again, this is well documented that they had kind of stepped up and started committing strings of robberies, hitting up banks and pizza parlors, and getting so good at it that they developed a big reputation among law enforcement, federal investigation. They appeared on the TV show Unsolved Mysteries, and basically the police really were out to get the Romper Room. They were looking really bad that all these banks kept getting hit, and because it was known on the streets that Mac Dre was associated with the Romper Room, even though they couldn't necessarily prove that the Romp was behind the robberies at the time, law enforcement were looking heavily into the Romper Room and into Mac Dre. This level of harassment led Dre to release the song Punk Police, which is a dope song, but it's also really interesting because he actually calls out some of the police officers that were investigating him by name. In retrospect, that might not have been the best idea, kind of antagonized law enforcement and turned up the heat even more. But because these guys felt like they were getting away with it, they just continued to do their thing, and banks kept getting hit, as Dre says in the song Punk Police. Now, this is really well documented and well known that in 1992, Mac Dre took a trip down to Fresno to do a show and decided to return a little while later to join some of his friends who were going down there to scope out a possible robbery. But his plan was just, oh, you're going to Fresno? I'm going to go with you because I met this girl at the show and I'm going to kick it with her. It's also been documented that there was an informant within the crew who was wearing a wire and providing information on what was going on. And what happened was, as Mac Dre went down there and his friends went off to do what they were going to do and scope out a possible bank that they were going to target, that this was actually a setup that the informant helped initiate, and that had those guys gone through with robbing that bank, they would have been caught immediately by the FBI. since instead of coming through with the robbery, they just scoped it out and drove around, they decided not to go through with it. But the feds still arrested those members of the Romper Room crew and Mac Dre for a conspiracy. If you know anything about conspiracy, you will know that it's a very easy charge to catch because you don't actually have to carry out a plan. You don't even have to be the mastermind behind the plan. They just have to prove that you have knowledge of what's being committed. And at that point, the only way to get out of it is damn near by snitching on everybody and preventing them from carrying out the crime, or just doing everything you can within your power to say, hey, I'm not part of this. I think that because of the antagonizing that Mac Dre had done on his songs, and because they just wanted to take him down anyway because of the fame he was reaching, they really made an effort to include Mac Dre as part of this case, and I believe that's what he went down for, which is federal conspiracy to rob a bank. Very serious charge. So as Dre was locked up and awaiting trial in the Fresno County Jail, he started recording songs over the phone, and I believe he was the first person to do this, record an album over the phone from jail and release it. People have commented on my video saying that they think X-Rated was the first. This is actually not true. You can look this up on the timeline. X-Rated's album over the phone came out a few years later. Mac Dre's came out in 1992, and you can actually look up interviews where Mac Dre has talked about giving X-Rated the game on how to do it, having one phone where you record your lyrics and another phone where you have the beat playing. And you can also look up interviews where X-Rated has substantiated this as well and credited Mac Dre for giving him the game. Crazy enough, I remember being a kid on KMEL and hearing that Mac Dre was arrested for bank robbery when Davey D was reporting this back in the day. I didn't know who Mac Dre was at the time, but that always kind of stuck out to me like, damn, they got him for bank robbery? That's crazy. A rapper robbing a bank? Didn't feel right to me. Didn't feel right to a lot of people. In my mind, I believe it was a setup. I don't think Dre went down to Fresno with the intention to rob that bank. And I don't think it can be said enough how detrimental this was to him at the height of his career. Like I said, he's opening up for Ice Cube. He's doing big things. He's making his name known on the West Coast. And all of a sudden, his career is interrupted by a federal prison sentence. And he actually got convicted and sentenced to 5 years. And when people look at Dre's career as to why maybe he didn't blow up sooner, or why cats like E40 blew up and other dudes from Vallejo were successful, this is why. This is a big setback. And it should also be noted that Mac Dre could have got out of the situation if he had cooperated and given information on his friends about what they were doing with the banks and the robberies, etc. But as it's well known, he did not snitch. He kept his mouth shut. And during his prison time, like I said, the Back in the Hood album was released, and also the Young Black Brother album was released, which collected a lot of other songs, as well as some of the songs that he recorded from jail. This is also where Mac Mall made his debut. Mac Mall also being from the Crest Side, I believe only 16 years old at the time, kind of a young protege of Mac Dre, and part of this Mac family tree that we speak of, where you have the Mac Dre, Mac Mall. And Mac Mall's solo album, Illegal Business, was released on Young Black Brother Records along with Kyrie while Dre was locked up. And by all accounts, while Dre was doing his time, he was still rapping. He was kind of networking within the feds. As you know, the federal system is prisoners from all over the country. You don't necessarily end up in a prison where you committed your crime or where you're from. They might ship you all over. I believe Mac Dre did his time at Lompoc Federal Prison. This is something that would have broken a lot of people, but it says a lot about Dre that he kept on and kept his head up and remained strong. When Dre was released from the feds, he really decided to get headfirst back into the rap game, but easier said than done, because like I said, when you lose 5 years, that's a lot of momentum that you have to work hard to get back. But that's exactly what he did. The first release that he dropped out of jail was the Rompilation. It should be noted that this was not out on Young Black Brother Records. This was actually on Romp Records. So Dre started doing his own thing. And the Rompilation is a super dope album, and it sold really well, and it features cats from all over the Bay: San Quinn, Messy Marv, JT the Bigger Figure, Doobie, Coolio the Underdog, Into Deep, and a lot of Dre's homies that he was putting on at the time. His first solo album when he got back was Stupid Doodoo Dumb. And this is also another dope album, classic. It's got Spice One on there and many others. A lot of classic songs like Life's a Bitch and I Need an Eighth. Majority of the production was handled by K. Lou out of Richmond. And K. Lou is a legend. He's got a lot of dope credits, including Master P and a lot of the early No Limit Records stuff. Stupid Doodoo Dumb was followed by Rapper Gone Bad. And this is another dope album that could tell Dre invested a lot into. It had music videos for the songs Fire and for the title track Rapper Gone Bad. And obviously, you know, back then it wasn't easy to film and record and distribute a music video independently. So this was a big deal. He could tell he's taking things serious and getting his momentum back. One of the interesting things about Rapper Gone Bad is that it actually has a diss song aimed at Mac Mall and Kyrie called Mac Stabber. And from what Dre expresses on the song, it sounds like he was a little bit displeased with how things were going while he was locked up, in terms of Mac Mall and Kyrie doing their own thing possibly and going their own way, and possibly Dre felt like he was being left out of it. I don't promote any beef, but damn, that's a cold ass diss song. Later on, of course, Mac Dre and Mac Mall reconciled, and we'll get into that later. The final release on Romp Records was the Rompilation Part 2, which also featured cats from all over the Bay Area and up-and-comers, and was successful as well as the first. The end of Romp Records would kind of mark a new phase of Dre's career. It's also important to note about Mac Dre's history that in 2001 he moved up to Sacramento, and this was kind of a big deal at the time because it allowed him to be tapped into what was going on over there. Around this time he started doing some side projects through other people's labels like Heart of a Gangsta, Mind of a Hustler, Tongue of a Pimp, which Dre ended up complaining about, saying that the mix down was messed up and the business was kind of dirty. There's also Mac Dre is the name, which features a lot of production by Big Hollis, a Sacramento producer. Also features Looney Coleon, Sacramento rapper. So you can see that Dre's kind of starting to branch out a bit. And this reinventing of himself, he goes through all these different phases. He went through the Young Black Brother phase, he went through the Romp Records phase, but his biggest jump off in 2001 was Thizz Entertainment. I feel like it took a little while for the ball to get rolling on Thizz Entertainment for what Dre was really trying to do. Obviously, Thizz is a code name for ecstasy, so you can see how that might have influenced his music style and the things he was doing at the time. The first project that he dropped on Thizz Entertainment was It's Not What You Say, It's How You Say It. That's one of the personal favorites of mine. Really dope album. There's also the Cutthroat Committee side project with Doobie and PSD, the Rompilation Part 3. But the big breakthrough was the album Thizz Washington with the hit song Thizzle Dance. That was produced by Psycho, who's actually from Portland. I messed that up in my prior video where I said he was from Seattle. He had actually moved to Seattle from Portland, but Psycho, rest in peace, deserves a lot of respects. I don't think he gets enough credit for really engineering that sound behind the Thizz Dance. And this is where I really got to talk about how big this song was, because when this dropped, you heard it everywhere. And I'm not going to lie, it influenced a lot of people, myself included, to get on the Thizz bandwagon, if you get what I'm saying. It was a wild time. The other big thing around this time was Trill TV. Now, I think Dre was, again, like I said, always reinventing himself, always very clever as a businessman, as someone in the industry. And he was ahead of his time in terms of documenting everything that was going on in his life. And this is kind of a common thing today with YouTube and social media, where we always know what somebody's doing. But before that, it was pretty rare. And for a guy like Mac Dre, it was really special for people to take a look into his world and really see how he gets down. And I'm not going to lie, when I saw this, my mind was kind of blown. It was entertaining, it was educational, it was hilarious, it was informative, and it was just super dope. I think between the Thizz Dance coming out and Trill TV blowing up, I mean, this is when I think Mac Dre reached the height of his popularity and success. As I've said in prior videos, around this time, everyone wanted to look like Mac Dre. They wanted to dress like Mac Dre. They wanted to talk like him, and they wanted to rap like him. He was the undeniable king of the Bay Area, and his movement was just getting stronger and stronger and stronger, and he was easily the most popular local rapper in the Bay Area at the time. I just got to give him that. And people have talked to me about this before from other regions, but unless you were really there, I mean, this is when I was a teenager. I could see for myself it was huge. He was probably bigger than any other mainstream artist in the Bay Area at the time. It went from the point where just me and my friends were up on him to the point where everybody knew about him. Everybody was listening to him, especially the song Thizz Dance and as well as Boss Tycoon with Yuck Mouth. These were huge hits, and it was exciting to see where Mac Dre was going to go from there. Another interesting thing about Thizz Entertainment is that Dre's vision was to sign artists from all over the Bay Area. So he had already been working with Ryder J. Clyde from Pittsburgh, from the Mob Figures. He signed Mr. Fab. He was going to sign Keek. It's rumored that he was going to sign Fully Loaded from San Francisco, but they were already up under done deal. He was looking for cats from San Jose. He had Something Terrible from Sacramento. So he really had this vision of creating superstars in every single region in the Bay and having everybody rock together. I think if he had pulled this off, it would have been a great look for the Bay. I think he was really on point with his business. And at the time, he had a great relationship with City Hall Records. Now, City Hall is a distribution label, and they were responsible for shipping CDs to the stores. And they had a deal where Dre would bring his album straight to City Hall, and they would just cut him a check. So basically, he figured out the more projects that he dropped, the more paper he could get through this distribution deal. They had no problem selling these units, especially after Chill TV and all these other things blew up. So then you have the albums Al Boo Boo. And in 2004, when I think he was really at the peak, it was Mac Dre Fever. He dropped 2 albums on the same day, again, ahead of his time, and also balling out, because that's 2 albums on one day. That's 2 paychecks on one day too. And then you had the Genie of the Lamp and Ronald Reagan. And these albums had the songs Get Stupid and Feeling Myself, which are probably Dre's biggest songs. It was pandemonium when these joints dropped. I remember hearing them at high school dances, out of people's cars, clubs, parties, everywhere. Everybody was going stupid. Everybody was popping Thizz. Everybody was bumping Mac Dre. It seemed like he could not be stopped. And I also got to shout out my boy Jonah from Wash House. Wash House set up Dre in the studio a lot of times, helped him pick out the beats, really doing a lot of behind the scenes things for Mac Dre. And they played a big role in putting out those records. In 2004, again, this is 3 albums in 1 year. He dropped The Game Is Thick, Part 2, which is a tribute to his old friend, the Mac. And it's just kind of crazy that just 13 days after that album dropped, Dre ended up getting killed. Now, there's a lot that's been said about Mac Dre's death. There's still a lot of questions remaining to this day. It was a tragic situation. I remember being devastated by hearing the news that Dre had been killed. There's a lot of uncertainty around what actually happened. If you want to look it up, there's an article called Who Killed Mac Dre by Donald Morrison that came out last year that really goes into detail about the whole story. I remember at the time, basically most of us were under this impression that Fat Tone, a rapper from Kansas City, was responsible. But this is weird because it was kind of early in the days of internet gossip. And there was supposedly some line that Fat Tone had said about shooting the Thizzle man in the Fizzle van, and people kind of took that to mean that he might have had something to do with it. Dre was out in Kansas City at a show, and he had the opportunity to do another show, another event at the same night that I believe Fat Tone was a part of. It's rumored that possibly that event didn't go that well and Fat Tone wasn't happy about it. I don't really want to speculate. I don't want to get into it. Like I said, that article by Donald Morrison, you can really get a lot of good info out of that if you want to check that out on Google. But for me personally, I'm not here to solve that case. It's an unfortunate situation. I will speak on this. From what I understand, Fat Tone really went on a mission to clear his name, even going out to the Bay and showing up and being like, hey, I'm Fat Tone, I'm out here. And just so y'all know, I have nothing to hide because I didn't do this. There's also a situation of Fat Tone's death, which was rumored, speculated to be retaliation for Mac Dre's death. And Cat from Filmo, Mac Minister, got caught up in that. and that's a whole other situation. I believe Mac Minister is still fighting his case, but Fat Tone unfortunately ended up getting killed in Las Vegas as well. Just really ugly situation, man. And I don't think the Bay has still recovered from Mac Dre's death. You could say that he almost became bigger in death. He blew up even more. He was even more celebrated. But for me personally, I would have loved to see where Mac Dre would have gone. I remember being in high school and just walking around and finding a flyer on the ground. There was a huge concert at the Shoreline Amphitheater, and the headliners were Trina, Trillville, Lil Scrappy, and Mac Dre. And just to think that he had gone to that point, because Trillville and them, they were huge at the time, mainstream acts. I think if Dre had lived, he would have gone on to get major deals. I think he would have been all over MTV. I think once the world got to see that personality that we all got to see on Trill TV, he would have been out of there. But unfortunately, we didn't get a chance to see that possibility. And you know, it was a tragic loss. And so many people were affected by that when it happened in 2004. Since Dre's passing, Thizz Entertainment has pushed on. They made a real effort to keep his name going. A lot of projects came out under that Mac Dre umbrella. There's also a lot of controversy that I want to speak on about E40 and the hyphy movement. The hyphy is a term that Keek the Sneak is the first person to use, but Dre was heavily affiliated with that scene before he died. There's a track by Mac Dre called Hyphy with Keek the Sneak on it, and this was years before the actual hyphy movement. I think Dre's death was kind of the catalyst that brought the Bay Area together and brought that whole go stupid, go dumb type of vibe, that type of sound that he was on before he passed, and it took on new meaning and new culture, the ghost riding the whip. And I remember seeing this everywhere vividly, and I do think it, in a way, it was kind of a celebration of what Mac Dre had brought to the game, even though cats like Keek the Sneak had filled in the void. And I think E40 did a really good job at carrying on the torch too. And people have accused him of stealing Mac Dre's lingo and saying that him and Mac Dre were never cool and all this stuff. And I think 40 has done a good job at defending himself, pointing to examples of how, like I said earlier in the video, yeah, they had little battles and stuff like that back in the day, but there was never really no beef in between them. And it sounds like it was all love between them before Mac Dre passed. I mean, Be Legit was affiliated with Mac Dre and appears on some of Mac Dre's albums. Lil Bruce, who was part of that early battle beef, became really good friends and also released albums on Thizz. And E40 appears on Mac Dre and Mac Mall's record, The US Open. So I really don't see it as E40 biting or stealing or disrespecting or anything like that. Obviously, in the song Tell Me When to Go, you hear him talking about ghost riding. You hear him talking about go stupid, go dumb. That wasn't necessarily his vibe before, but why not? The whole Bay was on this wave. And I thought it was really dope that he put R.I.P. Mac Dre in the video. And that was a huge video. It was all over MTV. The whole world got to see us. And like I said, the Bay Area became much stronger during the hyphy movement. Now, what went wrong after that? Well, there's a lot of things. After a while, there's only so many songs you can make called Go Stupid, Go Dumb. The sound wasn't really that sustainable and long lasting for the rest of the world. People kind of got tired of it. People were trying to just kind of hop on the wave. There's a lot of other styles besides hyphy that were coming out at the time. And I don't know, things just kind of got crazy. In terms of Thizz Entertainment, respect to all those guys. They've done a good job of keeping the legacy alive. But that also did kind of get out of control when you had tons of albums coming out that said Mac Dre presents on them, or this Mac Dre seal of approval, or a lot of albums came out. Some were authorized, some were unauthorized, that had unreleased or re-released and recycled Mac Dre songs. It's unfortunate. I feel that there hasn't been a real proper Mac Dre album to come out after his death that has the original quality of the others. I'd still be interested in hearing it. I don't know what's up with that. I gotta give a shout out to Andre Nicotina. I think he's done a good job at representing for Mac Dre after his passing. I believe they might have been working on a collaboration album before Dre died. And there was also this unauthorized bootleg called A Tale of Two Andres that was going around in stores. And I believe they actually made it official and made their own Tale of Two Andres and took some of the songs they had done together and some unreleased stuff and dropped that officially, which is a pretty dope project. Also got to give a shout out to Mac Dre's mother. She's done a good job at keeping his name going. And shout out to all the Thizz Entertainment guys, Kilo Kurt and Miami and Doobie and all the rest. There's other things that have gone down with Thizz Entertainment after Dre's death, but that's a whole nother story. But there's still this mystery, this energy, this aura around Mac Dre. I listen to Mac Dre's albums like they just came out. He's still in my rotation constantly. I'm still digging and looking for rare features and rare songs that I haven't heard before, and I'm finding stuff that I'd never heard before. He was prolific. I think he was the sauciest dude in the game, and I think if he was still alive to this day, he would be smashing. I don't think he would have fallen off. I think he would have gone even farther. At the same time, his legacy is interesting because when you talk about that cutthroat lifestyle that he represented, it was real. And, you know, he was a real street cat, real gangster. And unfortunately, he died a gangster's death. And that's a really sad moment. It's a really sad thing to think about what could have been. And he died early. He left children behind and family. But overall, the Bay Area is so proud of Mac Dre. And he influenced so much out here. And his story is crazy. Like I said, the reinventing himself, being in the game since the late 80s, since a teenager, and still smashing into his 30s. What more can I say? This is an epic story of the history of the Bay. Rest in peace, Mac Dre.